This is a relatively hard film for me to talk about, not because I don't love it, or because I don't have a lot to say about it, but because I love it so deeply in a way that is very primal. I always watch this film with my mom on Mother's Day when I can. Even when we can't be together, we watch it separately on that day, simultaneously. It is a beautiful, lyrical, elegiac film. Deeply poignant in a way that Japanese film at its best grasps more deeply and more distinctly than art in a lot of other countries. It's a film about love, about devotion, about this gentle resilience, this quiet but formidable strength, this determination to persevere for one's own sake and for the sake of one's children, regardless of the circumstances one confronts. One reason why it's a bit hard to talk about this film is because a lot of the reasons that it does mean so much to me are not reasons that necessarily pertain to intellectual analysis. As much as I love Princess Mononoke, I think I can explain pretty well why I love that film. My love maps pretty clearly onto my philosophical and intellectual appreciation for that film. Here, it's not so certain. But I will say that this is a bold film that does not at first appear to be that radical. It's not an experimental movie. It's very sweet and quiet, deeply intimate, deeply empathetic in the real and genuine sense of that term. It's a term that's very overused, but in terms of very much making one feel the sorrows and the joys and the aspirations of someone with a vividness and a brightness, a luminosity that sadly we don't often have access to in everyday life. In that real sense of the term empathetic, I would hard pressed to give you a better film than this one. It is a film that gives you a gorgeously rapturous love story and then takes it away and does not necessarily say that everything will be alright. It does not shy away from deep sorrow and lamentation, but it acknowledges that this is inevitably a part of the world, that all things are transient, and that we must face our fates, the challenges that life gives to us, with the most thoughtfulness and care and consideration that we can muster. This is a film about a woman, a mother, Hana, who starts the film as a university student. She is shy, quiet, unassuming, doesn't seem to have very many friends. And she notices a mysterious but alluring man studying at the university. They get to know each other. He seems to be as awkward and uncomfortable as she is. They're both imperfect, flawed people, but they nonetheless bond. They get to know each other more deeply. They wander through the streets of the great city, making observations, thinking about the world. And eventually the man reveals that he is a wolf who can transform into a person. Now, in another film, this would be played for high drama and a lot of overblown situations, but this is a very different film. This is a very naturalistic film. It's very interested in the sweet, quiet, everyday moments of human existence. This is technically a fantasy movie because it depicts, well, someone who is part wolf. Who can transform back and forth between a wolf and a human. But there's nothing really fantastical about this. It is a very quiet, very contemplative movie. It is much more in common with, say, Whisper of the Heart than Princess Mononoke or Spirited Away. I don't just mean that it's very interested in human experience, in everyday emotionality, in particular tangibility, in the intricacy of particular situations. I do mean all that. But of course, you could say the same about, say, Princess Mononoke or Spirited Away. What I mean is that there is a deliberate aversion to high drama. There is a deliberate aversion to anything that smacks of sensationalism. There's nothing mythical or elevated about this. No hint of grandeur or dramatic intensity. This is a deliberately small and restrained film. Even moments of deep sorrow are restrained here. What ends up happening is that the man is killed while he is in wolf form. And Hana can only watch as the Japanese workers just throw him into the garbage truck as the wolf and drive off. It's a crushing moment, and yet it's played with such restraint. And she is left with the two small children that she had by this man, and she has to raise them. Very difficult under any circumstances, but made even more so by the fact that these kids are part wolf and can choose to live as humans or as wolves. They change back and forth very often when they're kids and can't really control that. And the film ultimately depicts the anxieties and uncertainties that having these kids causes for Hana and the choices that she feels that she has to make. She ends up having to leave the city and move out to one of the many abandoned Japanese houses in the countryside that are very inexpensive, which is why she is able to get a house like that despite basically being broke. The Japanese system is basically giving these houses away. But she has to work and transform the house and make it into a livable environment. She has to form connections with the neighbors, become a part of that larger rural community, and she ultimately has to give the kids the nourishing environment they need to grow up, while acknowledging that they ultimately need to find their paths and make their own choices, which they do. The kids are named Ame and Yuki. Ame for the rain, Yuki for the snow. Something that is much more obvious if you speak Japanese. Yuki is born during the snow, and Ame is born during the rain. That's why they're named that. Yuki ultimately decides to live as a person, while Ame ultimately decides to live as a wolf. And they have their own lives and their own individualities. And Hana ultimately has to acknowledge that she has done everything she can, and the kids ultimately now need to be able to do what they can. They need to make their own choices and live their own lives. So, this is not simply a film featuring motherhood and the bringing up of kids. That is literally what the film is about, and it is about it in a very honest, intimate, small-scale kind of way. There is an almost deliberate aversion to the kind of fantastical drama that the human-wolf romance plot kind of implies. And honestly, I do wonder whether that fantastical element prevents some people from taking this film as seriously as they should, because this is a very realist, very naturalistic, very small-scale, intimate kind of film. I really think that if there were not this fantastical element, then it would be taken more seriously outside the realm of anime dorks like myself, and seen as the masterpiece of the 2010s that it is. Even compared to much of director Hosoda Mamoru's other work, it is much more restrained. There is this same focus on familial connections, but it's done in a more unvarnished way. There is a focus on the passage of time and the inevitable impermanence that it brings. Again, many of you are probably familiar with the Japanese concept of mono no aware, kind of gentle, poignant awareness of the inevitable transience of all things. That is a term used to signify something that is very profound in Japanese aesthetics. It can't really be pinned down by one term or one idea, but that's the closest. Also, I do want to emphasize that this is not something that only exists in Japan. I think British poetry, for instance, something like William Wordsworth, something like John Keats, is very good at acknowledging and understanding that gentle, sorrowful passage of things that is inevitable to life. But I do think the Japanese are just better at it. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean that other countries, other cultures can't learn from that and benefit from it. This is a film very much concerned with, to use the William James terms, the American pragmatist philosopher, transitives instead of substantives. It's less focused on what currently is as a kind of static, fixed state, and more on this constant process of flux, of transformation. It does not see human beings as these static, atomized things that change merely acts upon. Rather, it sees people in their essence as being inevitably subject to and defined by this process of constant transformation and constant amorphousness. That is a subtle change, but an important one. I think everyone agrees that change exists and that people have to accept it. But to see human identity itself not as something static that exists outside the world, but rather as something that is inevitably shaped through the interactions between individual desires and the inevitable changefulness of the world is something a bit different. William James understood this very well, as did many of the great modernists, including in America. People like T.S. Eliot and Wallace Stevens. But here, that cosmic, celestial sense of constant changefulness is placed in a scale that is deliberately small and deliberately intimate and deeply, deeply personal. Hana is a character I really love. Someone who is, on first glance, kind of soft, kind of introverted. Not what certainly an American audience thinks of as strong, but she is in fact very, very strong, very resilient. She is able to accept change as an inevitable part of existence. That does not mean that it's not sorrowful. It's deeply sorrowful at times. It's deeply sorrowful that she lost the man she loved the most in the world. It's sorrowful that she lost the life she had as a very smart, capable university student who probably would have gone on to have a successful career. Instead, she goes out to the countryside and has to manage as a single mom to two kids who are difficult to raise. And yet she accepts this. She is okay. She prospers, and she helps her kids prosper too. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can. If you want to see more videos like this before anyone else, thank you all again. Adios, comrades.